we are starting with this one. Why every empire wanted Southeast Asia by audio point? I mean, my assumption is because, you know, there's a lot of like natural resource. The terminal says it, but there is spice. It's also like, you know, I think kind of seen as weak probably at the time by the empires, right? Like a lot of the Asian countries at the time didn't have like any massive armies or anything like that, so it seemed like an easy target, maybe. I'm guessing. Yeah, let's find out.
For over 1,000 years, Southeast Asia made more money than all of Europe combined, and every empire on Earth wanted a piece of it. The region was so valuable that countries went to war for centuries just to control tiny islands most people have never heard of. We're talking about spices worth more than gold, trade routes that connected three continents, and a stretch of water so important that whoever controlled it basically controlled the world economy. Let's go back to the 1400s. Europe is cold, food tastes like cardboard, and meat goes bad in days. There's no refrigeration, no preservatives, nothing. If you wanted your food to last or actually taste good, you needed spices. Not just any spices. You needed cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and pepper. But the frustrating...
Pepper. I literally do not go like a single meal without pepper. I always use pepper like every meal. I can't imagine like not only back in time, you know, not being able to have some cold food, but also not having pepper, yeah.
Hard for Europeans. These spices only grew in one place on Earth, Southeast Asia. Specifically, tiny islands in what's now Indonesia. The Maluku Islands, also called the Spice Islands, were the only place where cloves and nutmeg naturally grew. Imagine that. The entire world wanted something that only existed in a handful of islands most people couldn't even find on a map. In Europe, a pound of nutmeg could cost the same as a house. Pepper was literally used as currency. People paid rent with it. Dowries included it. When someone died rich, their will would list pepper, like we list bank accounts today.
That's crazy to think about. I mean, again, I use pepper every meal, and you know, it comes into like this small shaker that's like, I don't know, it's probably like €2 or something, and this thing lasts me like a few months, right? That's crazy to think about. I mean, a lot of things have different value throughout the story, right? But paper being like that valuable is just absolutely bananas, right?
According to historical records from the spice trade era, a single successful voyage to the Spice Islands could make a merchant richer than 10 years of normal trading in Europe. But it wasn't just about making food taste better. Spices preserved meat, which meant armies could march longer. Ships could sail farther. Cities could survive winters. Whoever controlled the spice trade controlled survival itself in the pre-industrial world. That's real power. But Southeast Asia didn't just have spices. The region produced silk, precious woods, gems, and gold. Trade records from the Indian Ocean system show that between the 1400s and 1600s, Southeast Asian ports handled more commercial traffic than Mediterranean ports. This region wasn't some backwater. It was the center of global commerce. Now here's where it gets interesting. Southeast Asia sits at the crossroads of the world. You've got the Indian Ocean on one side and the Pacific on the other. If you wanted to trade between China, India, the Middle East, and Europe, you had to pass through Southeast Asia. There was no other way. The most important spot? The Malacca Strait. This narrow passage of water between Malaysia and Indonesia is only 1.5 miles wide at its narrowest point, but it connects the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. Every merchant ship carrying silk from China, spices from Indonesia, textiles from India, or anything valuable had to sail through this strait. Even today, about 25% of all traded goods pass through Malacca, including most of the oil going to East Asia. If you control the Malacca Strait, you control trade between 3 continents. You can tax every ship. You can decide who trades and who doesn't. You can make alliances or destroy economies just by closing the passage.
I guess kind of like the Suez Canal, right? I'm guessing the Malacca Strait has had a lot of conflict over who's in charge of it and who's taxing everybody.
The Malacca Strait wasn't just important, it was everything. Before Europeans even showed up, local kingdoms understood this. The Srivijaya Empire controlled Malacca from the 600s to the 1200s and became insanely
That's a long time,
wealthy
huh?
just by taxing passing ships. Then the Malacca Sultanate took over in the 1400s and did the same thing. These weren't primitive societies. They were sophisticated trade empires with diplomatic relationships across Asia and the Middle East. Historical records from this era, documented in sources like Anthony Reid's The Age of Commerce in Southeast Asia, describe bustling port cities where dozens of languages were spoken, where merchants from Arabia traded with Chinese captains, where gold and silk changed hands by the ton. Southeast Asian cities like Malacca, Ayutthaya, and Aceh were cosmopolitan centers that rivaled anything in Europe. Then the Portuguese arrived in 1511, and everything changed.
Well,
Portugal wasn't a big country. It didn't have a huge army or unlimited resources, but it had something new: cannons on ships, and a desperate need to break the Muslim and Italian monopoly on spice trade. For centuries, spices reached Europe through a complicated chain. Southeast Asian traders sold to Indian merchants, who sold to Arab traders, who sold to Venetian merchants, who finally sold to the rest of Europe. Every middleman took a cut. By the time nutmeg reached
in a way, like we said, the world is very connected today, but, you know, listening to this, it feels like, yeah, maybe not to the same level, obviously, but the world wasn't so disconnected, you know, back in those days, you know? Like we sometimes, or I sometimes tend to used to think that, you know, at this time, like everybody was much more closed off in their own country, but not as much as I think.
London, it cost 60,000% more than it did in the Spice Islands. That's not a mistake. 60,000% markup.
That's, what?
Portugal wanted to cut out the middlemen and go straight to the source. So in 1511, Portuguese ships commanded by Afonso de Albuquerque attacked Malacca. The city fell. Portugal now controlled the strait. They built forts, stationed soldiers, and forced every ship to pay taxes or get blown out of the water. But the thing about controlling Southeast Asia is, it's not enough to just take it. You have to keep it. And everyone wants what you have. The Spanish came next, claiming the Philippines in 1521 after Magellan's voyage. Then the Dutch showed up, and they weren't playing around. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company was formed. This wasn't just a business, it was a company that could wage war, sign treaties, coin money, and establish colonies. Basically, it was a country disguised as a corporation. The Dutch kicked the Portuguese out of most of Southeast Asia and established a brutal monopoly. They controlled the Spice Islands so completely that they burned excess spices to keep prices high. They uprooted spice trees on islands they didn't control to prevent competition. They signed treaties with local rulers that basically said, "Sell only to us, or we destroy your kingdom." When one island called Banda refused, the Dutch killed or enslaved almost the entire population of 15,000 people and replaced them with Dutch plantation workers. According to historical accounts of the Dutch East India Company's operations, they made profits that would equal hundreds of billions of dollars today. For 200 years, the Dutch East India Company was arguably the most valuable company in human history. Guess what?
Until, I guess, the... shit. My brain is having a moment of not remembering. The Indian one, right? The East Indian Company?
It all came from controlling Southeast Asian trade. Britain and France weren't going to sit back and watch the Dutch get rich. Britain took Malaya, which gave them control of rubber and tin. They built Singapore in 1819, turning a fishing village into one of the world's busiest ports almost overnight. The location was perfect, right at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, commanding the Malacca Strait. France took Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, creating French Indochina in the late 1800s. They wanted rice, rubber, and coal. But more than that, they wanted strategic position. If Britain controlled Malaya and the Dutch controlled Indonesia, France needed their own piece of Southeast Asia to compete. This is where it gets ugly. Colonial rule wasn't about partnership or development, it was extraction. It wasn't about all that nonsense civilization missions they probably told you in school. European powers restructured entire economies to grow cash crops for export. Locals who had grown rice for centuries were forced to grow rubber instead. Forests were cleared. Traditional trade networks were destroyed. Local rulers were either bribed into cooperation or removed by force. The British in Malaya created a system where ethnic Chinese and Indian workers were brought in for mines and plantations, while native Malays were kept in villages. The Dutch in Indonesia created a forced cultivation system where farmers had to give a portion of their land and labor to grow export crops for the colonial government.
I mean, I'm surprised that it's only a portion, right? And they didn't take everything over, because I feel like that's what most of the colonial power did, right? Just, you know, rather than like, the smart thing to do would be to like, maybe like help the country, like take over the country if you want to get the benefits, but help the country like get better so they can make even more of the stuff that makes you money, right? But I feel like that's not what they do. Most of the colonial power did that way, right? Of just taking over stuff, turning people into slaves, forcing them to like farm this or farm that. And, you know, it feels like it's only like making the production and the result worse, you know? I mean, I'm not talking about like doing some kind of ethical colonial invasion or whatever, but, you know, the way they did it always seemed like, when you listen to it, it always seems stupid, right? I mean, the East India Company, the most of all, right? But the way, every time, it's all about trying to get as much quickly, rather than like trying to plan long term or something. I don't know.
The French in Vietnam extracted rice and rubber so aggressively that famines occurred. These weren't accidents, they were the system.
Stupid.
Southeast Asia's wealth was being drained.
Like again, it's the kind of thing where like, I understand that they get a lot more money right away by going extreme on the exploitation, but like, when this happens and like, you know, half of the population dies or something, then that means that you have like that many less workers and production and all that. So again, it seems stupid, like all this way of doing it.
To build railroads in Europe, fund wars, and make colonial administrators rich. But what most of your history classes skip is this. Southeast Asians didn't just accept colonialism.
Well,
They
yeah,
fought back constantly.
of course.
In the Philippines, the Spanish faced revolts for 300 years. When the Americans took over after the Spanish-American War in 1898, Filipinos fought a brutal war for independence that killed hundreds of thousands. In Indonesia, the Dutch faced resistance from the moment they arrived until the moment they left. The Java War from 1825 to 1830 killed 200,000 people. Acehnese fighters in northern Sumatra fought the Dutch for 40 years. The Dutch never fully controlled the outer islands. In Vietnam, resistance to French rule started immediately and never stopped. It eventually grew into the First Indochina War.
I mean, is there any country where there was no resistance? That doesn't make sense, right? Like every country would have resistance, obviously.
And then the Vietnam War, conflicts that lasted decades and changed the entire region. These wars happened because Southeast Asia was too valuable to give up. For the colonizers, losing these colonies meant losing wealth and global influence. For Southeast Asians, these were wars for survival and freedom. By the mid-1900s, European empires were collapsing. World War II destroyed their ability to hold distant colonies. Japan's occupation of Southeast Asia during the war showed that Asian powers could defeat European ones. After the war, independence movements across the region finally succeeded. But the geography didn't change.
I was gonna say, I don't know who's controlling the Malacca Strait now. Like, is this some kind of joint deal between the countries around it, or is one country controlling it?
Southeast Asia is still at the crossroads of global trade. The Malacca Strait, as said earlier, still carries a quarter of the world's commerce. The South China Sea still connects the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Today, instead of spices, ships carry electronics, oil, cars, and everything else the modern economy needs. Now, countries like China, the United States, Japan, and India all watch Southeast Asia very carefully. Not because of nutmeg anymore, but because geography still matters. Whoever influences Southeast Asia influences global trade. The strategic value that made this region a target for 500 years hasn't disappeared. It's just evolved. Singapore, once a colonial port, is now one of the richest countries on Earth per capita. Indonesia, the old Spice Islands, is now the world's fourth most populous country, and a growing
That's a
economy.
lot.
Vietnam, after decades of war, is becoming a manufacturing hub. The same location that made these places targets for conquest is now making them powerful in their own right. The story of Southeast Asia teaches us something important. Geography can be a blessing and a curse. Being in the right location can make you wealthy beyond imagination. But it can also make you a target for everyone who wants what you have.
The AI voice
Thanks
using
for
itself a
watching.
little bit.
Like, share, and subscribe to keep watching Audio Point. See you in the next one.
I won't lie, unrelated to the video, I was just gonna say, like, you guys show fun, like, AI video, and, if it was just me, I would say, like, I don't want to watch any AI video, right? But the problem is that, like, I have so little of you sharing videos already, and half of you share AI videos, so it's like, I feel like I don't really have a choice, right? If I said, like, no AI video, I feel like I would lose half my viewers for this stream. So it's a bit of a shame. I just kind of wish that you guys would have, like, some real people videos sometime. I mean, I'm just saying, like, this video is fine, but might have been better with a real person. I'm just saying. Once Indonesia declared their independence, over 50,000 Indonesians moved to Netherlands and living their life there, and that's how the Dutch has a lot of Dutch Indonesian blood. I see. I mean, I guess that makes sense because there's probably like a lot of people who had become, after hundreds of years, they had become more like used to the Dutch ways, and so like it makes sense to go to the other country. Yeah. Okay, but otherwise, outside of like the fact that it's an AI video, pretty interesting subject. I do feel like I want to look up who controls the Malacca Strait now. Who controls the Malacca Strait? The Malacca and Singapore Strait are within the territorial waters of Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore, as per the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Okay. So I guess the three countries probably take the fees from ship passing, right? It's probably shared between the three, right? Yeah. Interesting subject. Okay, well, what I can say is that it's kind of crazy how things have changed, right? Because now, like, it wouldn't really make sense to do colonialism anymore, really, because most resources are like much easier to get or reproduce or stuff like that, right? I mean, I assume most countries are able to grow their own paper, for example. So like, colonial conquest of countries is probably a thing of the past. Not saying that there won't be like conquest of countries for different reasons, but for like colonial reason and exploitation of like natural resource, maybe less, I would say. Which means that for the most part, I think Asia should be kind of safe now. I mean, I don't think it would happen again. Like, the only reason people would conquer each other now is for like just having more territory and more manpower for like your economy, I guess. That's really the thing, yeah. A lot of Indonesia vocabulary came from the Dutch. Fair